Hey, everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod, and we're here joined again with our friend Dom Lese. Dominic is the at Bracket Dom from bracketometry.com. I have just gotten back from the Big Ten tournament. I was racing around along the lakeshore, getting back from Chicago. I can say a couple of things. It was actually a great game. My family were planning to leave that game early, the Purdue Penn State game, and then Penn State made it really interesting at the end. And so we had to stick around in a game that, I mean, boy, had Andrew Funk just hit one of those threes, I was kind of surprising. He was just ice cold today and couldn't bury in the things that he'd been hitting early in the tournament. And then I got stuck for 45 minutes at two separate toll collection things. It was a nightmare. I mean, they were like broken. You have to use credit card. It's
welcome to driving in Chicago.
That's all that matters.
Oh, I know. Well, and I can tell you that for all those of you who are listening from Chicago, you can close your ears for just a moment, but I love the city, except what a nightmare. The traffic, the Saturday rush hour on Saturday afternoon for some inexplicable reason. I'm very happy to leave town and return it because I just blasted right through Grand Rapids. It's gonna be like 5 minutes drive through town, and it's like about 50 minutes just to get 3 miles in Chicago. So anyway, I'm back. Thanks so much, Tom, for joining us. Although I'm sure you have bad traffic down in Austin as well.
I was literally about to say that. Yeah, I know exactly the feeling. Austin is the same way. And before that, Houston, I've always been in places with traffic.
Is it this week that's South by Southwest?
Yes.
In Austin? Yeah. So especially this week.
Well, this is the right week to stay inside and do nothing but watch college basketball and not even leave.
Right.
And you were telling me, I think earlier, that this is your spring break, right? So you've got like the whole week.
Oh yeah.
You're not even allowed to work if you want to. You have to watch basketball.
It kind of makes me mad. I wish it wasn't my spring break and I could use personal days for this. Now I need to find somewhere to use those. This would have been the perfect time.
Well, so you're number 2 bracketologist in the country. And I guess the first question is, we had the bracket reveal today, obviously. How did you do as far as your bracket comparing? I mean, we're trying to do it in the car, so it's kind of like hard. Like, what did Dom say? And then we're trying to figure out what they were saying on TV. So how did you think you did with the field?
I think I did quite well. I mean, obviously number 2, there's going to be a lot of people trying to come for that, but I still think I'm going to be right up there at the top of the rankings once everything compiles. There wasn't a single team that I missed by more than one seed line, except for the one team that I missed completely. And that was pretty much the team everyone missed completely in Rutgers.
Yeah.
I wasn't surprised that if someone I had out was out, that Nevada was the team that was in. I thought they were very deserving as well. I really thought there were like 69 deserving teams and someone was going to be out. I just thought it would be Nevada, and nope, it was Rutgers instead. But I didn't even have them in my last 4 in, so I knew they weren't completely safe, but still caught me a little bit off guard.
Speaking of Rutgers, when I saw that, obviously, it started thinking about it. I thought back to what we talked about in your first appearance with us, specifically with regard to the net. And if I remember correctly, the context that you put the committee's usage of net into was the following, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that the net is primarily a sorting mechanism to determine quality, what are quality wins, like a quad 1, quad 2, etc. But beyond that, you shouldn't really take a net ranking particularly seriously. Is that a fair?
Yeah, that is. Yeah, exactly.
And boy, was this Rutgers thing, and last year, absolute proof of that. Because last year, to refresh people's memory, Rutgers was somewhere in the 70s in the net. I think in the net era, which isn't that long, it's only replaced RPI. I don't know what it is now, 5-6 years, maybe.
About that long, yeah.
Yeah. I believe they are the lowest rated net team to get into the tournament field. I think that's right. If they're not, they're right there. So they're in the 70s last year and they get in. This year, I believe they were 40 and they don't get in. So I think that pretty much proves your case that you can't take that number particularly seriously in terms of it meaning much for an individual team's strength, let's say, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The only difference them being in the 40s did was make the teams who beat them look better because their net was
Right.
higher, but it didn't make them look any better. And yeah, like I said, it's a sorting tool. And part of the reason I'm not surprised that Rutgers is out is because if you use the net to sort their wins and losses, you go down to quadrant 3, and they were 2-4 in Q3.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's 4 bad losses and really just not enough good wins to make back up for it. The reason I partially thought they might still be in is because a lot of those Q3 losses were just borderline Q3, like Seton Hall, barely Q3, Nebraska, Temple, all of them were pretty close. So I kind of thought the committee might take that into consideration. Like, well, yeah, there's these Q3 losses, but they have a bunch of Q1 wins, and those are almost Q2 where they wouldn't hurt them nearly as much. But I think that kind of proves it a little bit that they really, the gap from literally 76 where it would be a Q3 to 75 where it would be a Q2, it might actually really make a difference. I mean, when you're sorting that many teams, sometimes it's hard to give teams those considerations of, oh, well, it was this close to this quadrant or this close to this quadrant. What's really going to stand out to you is just those records in each quadrant, and 2-4 in Q3. Yeah, that's going to hurt you if you don't really nitpick it and see how close some of those were.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things I thought, and it wasn't Chris Reynolds, the committee chairman, but it was, I can't remember the name of the guy. Somehow this information got out there today, and I don't know whether you saw that. They were asked about Rutgers in particular, and the sense I got is that the committee took into account what Rutgers did after Mawat Mag, who had been their starting power forward, and he got hurt with a season-ending injury maybe 3 weeks or so ago, somewhere around there. And the line was, well, they don't have a significant win after that happened. So I get it. What they were saying in essence with that is we have to evaluate what Rutgers is now, and what they are now is perhaps not as strong as even their overall season-long case would have us believe. That's how I interpreted it, at least. I'm not sure how it makes sense otherwise to even mention that. But I find that rationale a little strange, because it seems to me either we're taking that stuff into consideration or we're not. And so you look at some of these scenarios where, Houston's got a starter out, UCLA's got a starter out, Kansas has a starter out, Kansas's coach was out. He may be back for these first 2 games, but on and on and on. And yet I don't see those teams punished. And it's a different scenario saying, what seed are you assigning to someone versus whether a team is in or out of the field? I understand that, but did that surprise you? Assuming that I've got that right, that actually came from the committee. Did that surprise you that was a rationale that was used? Because it surprised me a little bit that they were that explicit.
It didn't surprise me completely, but it did somewhat, and I'll explain why. It surprised me because they absolutely take injuries into consideration. That is something that they factor in. If a team lost someone and they're playing worse without them, historically, teams will be punished maybe by a seed line or so. For example, Tennessee. I think Tennessee was a 3 seed based on their resume.
Right.
But losing their starting point guard, I knocked them down to a 4 in my bracket projection.
And that's what they did. Yeah.
But the reason I'm still surprised is just because historically, usually those injury considerations are only used kind of in the same way as the predictive metrics, kind of to adjust seeding, but not necessarily for selection. So that part took me a little bit off guard, because absolutely, a team that's playing worse without one of their better players, say you were going to have them at an 8 seed, maybe you have them now at a 9 or even a 10 because of that, just to kind of make the seeding more balanced. But historically, that usually doesn't actually cost a team a bid. It just costs a team some seeding. So I
Right.
was a little surprised to see that actually make the difference between maybe them being in and them being out. Again, it's not something that the committee doesn't factor in. It's just usually not at the cut line as much, where
Right.
I think in this case it was.
Yeah, and that's exactly how I saw it. So I'm glad to hear you say that, because it jives with my own view of this. It just seemed a very strange usage of that as an inclusion or exclusion sort of factor. But obviously, it sounds like, despite that, you're not outraged by the idea of Nevada getting that spot rather than Rutgers. It sounded like you felt that was pretty damn close to a coin flip in terms of the overall cases between the two teams, right?
For sure. I mean, I think Rutgers had the better resume. I guess really the reason I'm not outraged is just because of who they put in. Had it been anyone else, I might had they put in Oklahoma State, who actually was
Right.
ahead of Rutgers. They were the first team out. Rutgers was the second team out, which kind of
Right.
surprised me.
Yeah.
Yeah, had they put in Oklahoma State, I might have been a little bit more angry about that. But again, even though I think Nevada had a worse resume than Rutgers, I think Nevada had a tournament worthy resume. So they had to knock out someone if they were going to get in, and I'm not mad about them getting in at all. I think Nevada did deserve it. I just didn't think the committee would agree, so I'm actually not even too mad about missing that one.
Do you suspect, last thing about Rutgers, do you suspect that if Rutgers had beaten Purdue in the Big Ten tournament quarterfinal, that it would have been a difference maker for them?
I have to imagine so, especially because based on this bracket this year, it does seem like they took the conference tournaments a little bit more into
Okay.
their consideration than previous years. Maybe still not completely, but definitely had a bit more of an. For example, one of the ones I missed that I'm still kicking myself on, Marquette getting a 2 seed over Baylor. And that's clearly based on their Big East tournament run, because going into the conference tournaments, they did not have the better resume. After the conference tournaments, I thought Marquette had a better resume, but I kept them at a 3 because they don't factor in the conference tournaments. But that and a few others definitely showed that they factored them in a bit more this year. I think they heard some of the criticism last year of, hey, how are you ignoring all of these games? So
Right.
based on that and how big of a win that would be, especially since that would have made them 2-0 versus Purdue, yeah, I think they would have been in for sure.
Let me, on that point, then I promise I'll turn it over to Eric. On that point, I remember us talking about the conference tournaments, and you made an interesting point, which was, if you're playing on those things, it's not a bad idea, or it's not bad for your school, your team, if you're playing early on Friday, early on Saturday, especially, because that might be the last chance you really have to make an impression before they start locking it in. And I thought that stuck with me as well. In looking at today, obviously Purdue winning, there was no impact. They were a 1, they were going to be a 1. We know that. Penn State is a 10, right? That seemed about where they were going to land regardless of the outcome. I would assume you don't think they would have jumped to a 9 had they won it. But
I'll just put it this way in response to that, and then I'll let you finish. I think had they won, they would have had a 9 seed worthy resume, but I don't think they would have changed the bracket completely for a game that was finishing 10 minutes before the bracket was coming out. So in a way, I think the fairness won through with them losing that game, because they would have been underseeded if they won it, because I still think they would have been a 10.
Yeah, and I do too. But the other game that was played at the same time also supports that idea, because everything I was seeing is that most people had Memphis, I believe, as an 8 heading into the American Championship. Memphis goes out and beats Houston, obviously playing without Marcus Sasser, but you still have Memphis on the 8 line. So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see that they got any benefit from winning that game. And then 2, Houston actually finished as the number 2 overall seed in this thing, despite losing, whereas Purdue won their game. I guess Kansas didn't, but Purdue would be the other team maybe that would be able to make a case for why weren't we bumped up a line or a spot, not a line. But I think that would you agree the American also further buttresses the point that, hey, when you're playing in the late game on Sunday afternoon, it just doesn't matter what happens unless you have one of these really rare instances where the two teams playing each other are so close that it becomes an if then kind of scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Those late Sunday games mean nothing. They're not gonna, I mean, like if it's maybe for a bid thief, then of course it's still going to matter because we're going to have to adjust the bracket for that. Or like you said, for two teams that are virtually tied for a 2 or 3 seed, but otherwise it's not going to make a difference at all. Now, I will admit I had Memphis at a 9, but I don't think that win is what got them up to an 8. I was torn 50-50 between them and Iowa for the last 8-9 spots. And that debate ended up not meaning anything. They both got 8s anyway. So it was FAU that I missed on. They were the one down at a 9. But yeah, I if they were an 8 when the bracket came out, I think they still would have been an 8 even if they had lost. It wasn't the result of that game that made them higher than I had them by any means.
Right.
Now,
yeah, and you just have to wonder. I mean, if there's a point, the American, I have no idea what they'll do. I mean, they're losing Houston, and who knows what happens with that league going forward. But if you're the Big Ten, and there's been talk about this for years, but I really do wonder if at some point the Big Ten looks at this, and especially if you're correct in saying that this year you detect the conference tournament results, at least to a point, having more impact than maybe they have in the past. If that were to continue, then I got to believe there's an argument for the Big Ten looking at this and saying, hey guys, we need to adjust our schedule.
Absolutely. At the very least, put it to a Sunday morning game. I mean, because even that, them having Princeton at a 15, for example, like I thought Princeton might be a 14 just because Yale might have been a 14 and we can just swap them into the same exact spot. But the fact that they even had them lower in that morning game shows that, wow, they were even factoring in some of these Sunday morning results and shifting things because of that. So they definitely pushed back their timetable, but there's no feasible way, even with all the criticism they got last year, to push it back to the Sunday afternoon games. Those just have to have impact. So I would move it back to Saturday or Sunday morning at the latest.
And it becomes, this becomes a problem because you have so many interested parties. You have the networks involved, and they want to have games going on all day.
Money.
There was a year, and I don't know if you remember, Eric, which year it was when the Big Ten moved the tournament to the week previous in order to play
in New York, because it was Madison Square Gardens. They had to use a different week because the Big East has it usually so they had it the week before.
Which year was that? Was that 19?
I don't think Michigan State won it that year. No, I think it was
maybe it was
like 17.
Maybe it was 18. I'm not sure. Maybe it was 18. Yeah. But I was outraged by that because that's the thing. You can't win. That was worse. Things. If you do it then you got your teams all sitting on ice for almost 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Which is not ideal. So I guess there's no perfect scenario, but in any event, I'll turn the floor over to you, Eric. I've talked enough for now.
No, and I think, obviously what the whole Sunday afternoon game comes down to is it's money and it's exposure, right? And, you have to weigh how important is that bid for you? Are you losing bids as a league? And probably the answer is you're not. You might be losing a seed line somewhere here or there, right? That's probably all that's up for grabs. So then, is that worth the massive exposure you get? Because everyone's tuning in before the bracket show. They're tuning in to at least the end of the game. There's a lot of I don't know what the term is, but it's worth a lot of clout, I suppose, to be the league that's being shown right before the selection show. And so that's definitely going to go going forward, as now that CBS has a deal with the Big Ten. So I can't imagine that's going to change anytime soon because of that exposure. I had one other question about the Rutgers thing, because it was Chris Reynolds who was talking about it, because listening on the radio, he was talking about the fact that injury affected things. And one of the things he said was the fact that Rutgers down the end, that he was out long enough that they had a good feel for how good that team was without him, versus like losing him a week ago. And then they drop a couple of games. You're like, well, maybe they just started adjusting. And so his thing was like, well, we've seen what they are without him. Well, what were they? They lost at Minnesota, right? That's like a disastrous
Yeah.
loss. I mean, that's like the worst you could do. They had probably the best road quad one win in the country, right? When at Mackey.
Yeah.
And then they have arguably one of the worst quad four losses as a power five that was hoping to get in the tournament at, Minnesota.
For sure.
So, but it does lend to the thought line that where they used to say, well, the last 15 games, we say, how are you playing? And that's how we select things. And they said they don't do that anymore, but that's he's almost tacitly admitting that that's what he did, right? Like they're just splitting hairs, like, well, we're trying to figure out what to do. And I also wonder, you had mentioned before too, do you think the fact that it's Rutgers, I mean, if that was Kentucky, let's say it's North Carolina or Michigan State or Indiana, do you think that consideration's the same, or, what happened to Rutgers?
See, that's where I think sometimes the committee bias can seep through without them even realizing it, because injuries are so subjective. I mean,
Right.
It's sure, yeah, they definitely played worse without him, but determining how much do we punish them for how worse they were without him versus with him, there's no metrics or specific guidelines on that they have to follow. So, I mean, I'm sure that they're not purposely doing it, but like I said last time, but again, if it was Kentucky in that same exact situation, I think they would still maybe lean a little bit more towards the overall body of work. At the same time, they did put in a mid-major in their place, so it's not like they're it's complete major bias here at the same time. But I still agree with that a little bit.
Yeah, or this year, we had a really good example. If it had been North Carolina with Rutgers' resume,
Right.
Oh yeah,
do they get the break? I suspect. I think most people would suspect that they would have. You're never going to convince everybody that there's not conspiracies at work. But I do think I actually do. If you look at it this year, I like the fact that North Carolina did not get in. Michigan, Wisconsin. I mean, none of these programs had great cases to make. And in the end, they really weren't close. So that's how it should have been, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, I like the fact that you had a mid-major in. I mean, to be honest, over a team, let's be honest, if anyone's been watching Big Ten basketball the last few weeks, who wants to watch Rutgers again? They're not a good team. They beat Michigan, but Michigan played like garbage in the Big Ten tournament. Rutgers is just not a team that was going to do anything in the NCAA tournament. You might as well just have Nevada playing anyway. To be honest, I don't,
Yeah, I mean, no, this isn't what the committee uses, but just from a fan perspective, like Nevada played Rutgers on a neutral field. I think Nevada would beat them. I think they're a better team. I think they're a more fun team. Now, that's not what the committee uses to select, but just again, from a fan perspective, yeah, I'd much rather see Nevada in there than Rutgers. So I'm happy to be wrong.
Any other? So, I mean, obviously you talked about there were a few cases where you had a team on the wrong seed line, one direction or another, but anything in that realm that kind of surprised you, or you didn't think there was a good case for? You mentioned, I guess, Marquette being a 2 is one you were kind of kicking yourself for not revising. Anything else like that?
See, I mean, now that one didn't surprise me on any. That's probably the reason I'm kicking myself on that one, because of all the ones that I missed by one seed line, that's the one I was the most torn on when I submitted my final bracket. So of course I miss it. There were a couple others. Like I said, I didn't miss any by multiple seed lines. So none were big surprises, but a couple of, and I'm pulling up the bracket right now. Couple of the 5 seeds over the 6 seeds surprised me, for example. Like, let's see here. St. Mary's still being a 5, despite finishing with that absolute destruction against Gonzaga. I mean, that just really shows. I know I talk about the metrics are more important for seeding and the resume is more important for selection, but that just makes me realize that's even more the case than I thought, because St. Mary's does have the metrics, but that's kind of about all they got besides that one win against Gonzaga in overtime at home earlier in the season too. And to still see them at a 5 seed, I had them at a 6. And I mean, if it weren't for the metrics, I wouldn't even have had them there. So that maybe surprised me a little, but again, that's 1 seed line off. Miami at a 5 as well. While I'm on the 5 lines, I thought they were also going to be a 6. But again, that doesn't surprise me significantly. To some of the teams that dropped down, Iowa State, TCU, both of them being on the 6 lines instead of a 5. I think that just surprised me because based on the committee's top 4 reveal, it seemed like they were just in love with the Big 12. Like, oh, they're all
Right.
these teams and all you can get is good wins. You can't get bad losses against each other. I didn't think those teams would be really capable of falling much from that top 4 reveal. So seeing Iowa State, who was a 3 in their reveal, go all the way down to a 6, despite finishing with 2 blowouts of Baylor. I know they had a rough stretch before that, but didn't see them dropping that far. If anything, I just thought it would be the committee almost not wanting to admit they were wrong. Like, oh, we had them at a 3 and they've been all right since then. How can we drop them 3 spots from there?
Right. Well, and TCU would be an interesting case because, again, we talk about injury having an impact, right? And it seems like, I mean, if you felt like their overall resume, even as is, warranted a 5 rather than a 6, but they get the 6, well, clearly they didn't account much at all for the period of time where, what was it, Mike Miles was the guy who was injured? Didn't really account for it at all, apparently.
I'll say this, the reason with TCU, they must have accounted for it some with them going down to a 6. I had them at a 5. But I think the reason they didn't go down much farther than that compared to Rutgers is just they played a good bit of basketball without him this year. He was out for an extended stretch earlier in the season too, and they played all right without him. I mean, pretty similar results to how they played with him. So I think when you have that to show for, hey, it didn't affect us that much, they're not going to punish you as much.
Right.
Either.
My point, just sorry I wasn't clear. My point is, I would think if you accounted for, well, yeah, they took some losses, but there were losses without their best player, that should have cut the other way and solidified them even more on the 5 line. You know, kind of the opposite of the Rutgers thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like it is kind of the case with that. I feel like the injuries, a lot of times they'll punish you a lot more for having someone out than they'll help you.
Right.
You really got to play well once he comes back to get that injury consideration. Creighton, I thought they were going to be a 6 seed because they had some losses without Kalkbrenner earlier in the year, and they were better when he came back, but they still kept them at a 7, I guess, just because they weren't blowing the doors off people once he came back. And I've seen it before where teams had some bad losses with someone out and then just came back and were world beaters. And then the committee almost acted like those losses never happened, but you almost have to do that. You almost have to show a clear distinction in who you are with them and without them to get that injury consideration boost, where on the flip side, you lose them and you just play a little worse without them, they're going to drop you down a lot quicker.
Right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks so much, Dom Lese from Bracketometry.com. Check out his, subscribe to him on Twitter or follow him on Twitter at BracketDom. Make sure you check out his link, and I guess it would be a couple days before Bracket Matrix figures out the whole statistics and sort of where your ranking goes.
Usually doing a day or 2 from now. So fingers crossed that I'm still up there. I think I'm going to be like in the top 10%, but it's tough when you were number 2 because I committed like 15th this year, but then there's a lot more people to pass you than to pass. So
absolutely. So before you go, let's get your picks for the Final Four. So I'm gonna pull up my brackets here. So let's start with the South region, Alabama and Arizona. Who do you have coming out of that region?
Oh, all right. I'm gonna say out of the South region, it's hard to go against Alabama.
Yeah, I think
I'm gonna say Arizona doesn't even make it to the Elite 8 against them. I'll say it's Alabama over Baylor in the Elite 8 of the South region. Yes.
And then let's go to the Midwest, which is the Houston, Texas region.
Man, this is a tough one. I don't think Houston's the favorite to win it all. If you look at the odds, I'm not as sold on them as that. But
neither am I.
I still think in this region, I'm going to take them to come out. Now, I think I probably am going to have them losing in the Final Four to the team I'll pick next. And Texas is playing awesome right now. Something tells me, no, I don't trust Texas in the tournament.
That's
Yeah.
that's called history. Yeah, no, I hear you on that. Well, the concern, just real quick, to me at least, the concern I have about Houston, and this was before Sasser got hurt, is I see that team and I love them. They were so many elements of that team remind me of vintage Tom Izzo teams, the way they defend, the way they rebound, the toughness. But that offense can get ugly at times. And I just think if you can't score better than they do, it's tough to win 4 straight. So I'm with you on that. I'd be a little bit nervous about them, but anyway.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Just because with their play style, they're going to be in close games that shouldn't be close. Now they're going to be the better team in all of them, but if you let a team hang around 4 straight games, eventually someone might knock you off. So, and I think Texas could do it if they get to Houston. I just don't even trust them to get there. But if Texas makes the Elite Eight, I think they beat Houston. But I'll take.
Then we'll then move down to the West region where you have number 1 Kansas versus number 2 Big Ten school UCLA. Who do you have there?
Yeah, right. Soon to be a rival of Michigan State there.
That's right.
Yeah, right.
In this one, I think Kansas. I'm taking them. I think I'm taking Kansas to potentially win it all again, at least get back to the Final Four, and I think I would take them over Houston. I know they didn't look great against Texas. And like I said, Texas, I think at their best can be the best team in the country. I just don't trust them. At least Kansas, is consistent. They have that tournament experience. We'll see with Bill Self. Hopefully he's all right and back for the tournament. If he is, I think they're just going to be back to what they were before. I think you can almost blame that loss to Texas on that. I think this team might be the best team in the country again. And it's hard to pick anyone against them, especially since everyone else has such a tough path. I mean, UCLA and Gonzaga having to go through each other, UConn having to go through St. Mary's or VCU. Give me Kansas out of that region. I feel pretty good about that one. And I think might even be my pick to win the whole thing.
And then finally, the East, everyone's least favorite number 1 seed, it seems to be Purdue. And then Marquette is a 2. And of course, Michigan State sitting over there lurking at the 7 seed.
This is one of the craziest regions to me because I think this might have like the worst 1, 2, 3, and 4 seed, but maybe the best 5, 6, 7, and 8 seed. I mean, no one wants to pick Purdue. No one wants to pick Marquette. No one wants to pick Kansas State. No one wants to pick Tennessee. But then after that, you have Duke, Kentucky, Michigan State, and Memphis. I mean, those could be the 4 in the Sweet 16 right there. That's some classic blue blood action right there. So this is really the most wide open one to me for sure. I might go. This is where I might end up picking a bold one, and I'm not sure if I've decided which one I'm going to go bold with yet. I'm sure you'd love me to go Michigan State as my bold pick.
No, none of. Yeah, we want honesty.
It may dictate whether you come back or not, but go ahead and pick.
Put it this way. I do think I might take Michigan State over Marquette.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but something tells me they might be playing another upset team there in the Sweet 16 that might end up going all the way to the Final Four. I got a gut feeling with this Kentucky team. I know they lost to Vanderbilt twice.
That is a bold.
I know. I don't know if I'm going to do it. Maybe I'll go with Duke instead. But I feel like
now here's the thing. I just want to get this line off. I'm going to repeat it when we move on to the next thing. I looked at it and I happened to watch Oral Roberts just absolutely dominate in their conference tournament championship game. And of course, we all remember them from a couple of years ago. I've seen their 7'9" center Vanover. I saw him play in AAU years ago before he was in college. And of course, he stuck in my memory because he's 7'9". I was inclined to think Oral Roberts has a hell of a shot to take out Duke. And then I watched ESPN's Bracketology show, And every single one of these guys picked Duke to come out of that region. So that solidifies it for me. Oral Roberts takes out Duke in the first round.
Well, put it this way, I almost wanted to take Duke myself, and then I watched that and I was like, well, that's not really an against the grain pick anymore.
No.
Literally all of them are taking it, and I still want to take a low seed here. Yeah.
And here's the other thing. This season, more than any other year, I think if you've won a bunch of games, it feels like you've really got a lot of momentum, you're on a roll, you are just accelerating toward the rug getting pulled out from underneath you. And they've won 9 games in a row now. So what are the odds that they're going to win 4 more? I don't like their odds.
Agreed. And people forget they played Purdue earlier this year as well, and that wasn't even close. Purdue wiped the floor with them. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to have Purdue in my Elite 8. I do think I'll have Duke over Tennessee, but then I maybe just a hedge would still pick Purdue in the Final Four, like in my office pools. But I think the other side of that bracket legitimately might be Kentucky, Michigan State in the Sweet 16. And it's like, who wins that? And it's hard to say the winner of that ends up going on to win the whole region. So I don't want to be too chalky and take Michigan or take Purdue again. And take pretty much all the 1 seeds at that point. But if you're filling out an office pool and you're trying to win, they might be the smart play just to hedge, because I think they make the Elite 8 there. And I think whoever comes out of the bottom half of that bracket, even though they can definitely beat Purdue, could be anyone.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I want to remind you and then everyone else listening and watching. And so if you have not yet subscribed to the Final Fours on the Schedule, you can go to YouTube at TFFINOTS. You can watch us here. And if you're watching, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. But we are having a bracket contest. We'd love to invite you to be one of our celebrities to come on.
Absolutely.
So you all have to do a search on the ESPN site, because we're using that just because it's simplest. So TFFINOTS. There you can win prizes from Nudge Printing, which you could use to get some Texas State gear. How does that sound?
Absolutely.
All right. Well,
and when we're going to make our first tournament next year ever.
There you go. It's only a matter of time, right? And then we'll notice
due to lose. We're due to make one eventually, right?
Right. Right. We'll know if things are kind of funny if you have them as your last 4 in all next year or something like that. So, so again, thanks a lot, Dom Lese from Bracketometry at Bracket Dom. We appreciate it so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely. It's a blast as always. Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.